What happens when a Hollywood icon sits down expecting a friendly chat about his latest project, only to find himself ambushed by one of television's most notorious interviewers? What we witnessed between Don Johnson and Joy Behar was television at its most explosive, a verbal sparring match that escalated so quickly, it left the entire studio in stunned silence. This is the story of how a simple promotional interview turned into one of the most dramatic walk-offs in daytime television history. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think really caused Don Johnson to reach his breaking point. Now, let's get into what actually happened when these two powerhouses collided. Don Johnson walked onto the View set with his trademark confident stride, flashing that million-dollar smile that made him a household name. The audience erupted in applause as he took his seat at the iconic table, clearly expecting the usual promotional softball questions about his upcoming film project. "Welcome back to The View. Everyone knows you from Miami Vice and Nash Bridges," Joy Behar began, her tone seemingly warm, but with an edge that regular viewers would recognize. "But today I want to talk about something else entirely." Johnson's smile faltered slightly, sensing the shift in energy. "Well, I was hoping we could discuss the new movie. It's really something special, and I think your audience would love it." "Oh, we'll get to that," Joy replied, leaning forward slightly. "But first, I'm curious about your thoughts on some recent comments you made about method acting and how today's actors are, quote, too soft to handle real drama." The other co-hosts exchanged glances, clearly sensing this wasn't going to be the typical celebrity chat. Johnson shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I think there might be some context missing from whatever quote you're referring to," Johnson said carefully. "What I've always believed is that acting requires a certain toughness, a willingness to dig deep into uncomfortable places, right? But you specifically said that actors today lack the grit that your generation had," Joy pressed, her voice taking on that prosecutorial tone that had made her famous. "Isn't that a bit presumptuous, considering you haven't worked with every actor in Hollywood?" "Joy, with all due respect, I think you're twisting my words," Johnson replied, his famous composure beginning to crack. "I was talking about the craft, about commitment to the work. I never said anything disparaging about an entire generation." "But that's exactly what you said," Joy shot back, pulling out a printed article. "Right here, you said modern actors are, quote, pampered and lack the hunger that drove us to create memorable characters." Johnson's eyes flashed with irritation. "First of all, I'd like to see the full context of that interview because that doesn't sound like something I'd say. Second, even if I did express concerns about the industry changing, that's hardly controversial." "It's not controversial. It's just wrong," Joy fired back. "Have you seen the performances coming out today? The level of preparation and dedication these actors bring to their roles." "Of course I have, and there are incredibly talented people working today," Johnson said, his voice rising slightly. "But there's also a difference between talent and the kind of resilience that comes from working your way up through dinner theater and regional productions, grinding it out for years before getting your break." "So you're saying you had it harder than actors today?" Joy challenged, clearly enjoying the rising tension. "I'm saying the path was different," Johnson replied tersely. "We didn't have social media managers and teams of publicists protecting us from criticism. We learned to take hits and keep going." Joy leaned back with a satisfied smirk. "That's interesting because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having trouble taking criticism right now." The studio fell silent, except for the soft hum of the cameras. Johnson stared at Joy for a long moment, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Well, here you are getting defensive about a simple question about your own words," Joy continued, seemingly oblivious to, or perhaps enjoying, the storm she was brewing. "Maybe the problem isn't that today's actors are too soft. Maybe it's that yesterday's actors can't handle being questioned." Johnson's face had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. "Joy, I came here to talk about my work and hopefully entertain your audience. I didn't come here to be ambushed." "Nobody's ambushing you, Don," Joy said with false sweetness. "I'm just asking you to defend statements you made publicly. Isn't that what interviews are for?" "Interviews are supposed to be conversations, not interrogations," Johnson shot back, "and certainly not based on misquoted or taken out of context statements." The tension at the table was now palpable. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to intervene. "Maybe we should move on to talking about the new project." But Joy wasn't finished. No, I think this is important. Don Johnson wants to criticize an entire generation of actors, but when someone asks him to explain himself, suddenly it's an ambush. Johnson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more weight than if he had shouted. Joy, let me be very clear about something. I have been nothing but respectful since I sat down at this table. I have tried to answer your questions honestly, even though they're based on what appears to be either a misunderstanding or a deliberate mischaracterization of things I've said. So now I'm lying? Joy interrupted. I'm saying you're being deliberately provocative for ratings, Johnson said, his composure finally cracking completely. And frankly, it's beneath what this show used to represent. The words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Joy's eyes widened for just a split second before narrowing into that familiar combative glare that had become her trademark. Beneath what this show used to represent, Joy repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. Don, this show has always been about having real conversations, not just letting celebrities come on and give their prepared talking points. Real conversations, Johnson laughed bitterly. Is that what you call deliberately misrepresenting someone's words and then attacking them when they try to clarify? Because where I come from, we call that something else entirely. The other co-hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in. Maybe we can all just take a breath here. But Joy waved her off dismissively, never taking her eyes off Johnson. No, Sarah. I want to hear what Don thinks we should call it. Please enlighten us. Johnson stared at her for a long moment, clearly weighing his next words carefully. I think you know exactly what you're doing, Joy. You're trying to create a moment, manufacture some controversy that'll get people talking on social media, and you're willing to trash someone's reputation to do it. Nobody's trashing your reputation, except maybe you right now, Joy shot back. All I did was quote your own words back to you. No, what you did was take a thoughtful discussion about how the industry has evolved and turn it into some kind of generational attack, Johnson replied, his voice gaining strength. And when I tried to provide context, you doubled down and made it personal. Joy leaned forward aggressively. You know what's personal, Don? Coming on national television and insulting an entire generation of hardworking actors. That's personal to every young performer trying to make it in this business. I never insulted anyone, Johnson exploded, finally losing the last vestiges of his Hollywood charm. I was talking about systemic changes in how actors are developed and supported. But you've decided to make me the villain in some story you've already written in your head. The only story I'm interested in is the truth, Joy fired back. And the truth is that you came here expecting everyone to kiss your ring and tell you how wonderful you are. And you can't handle it when someone actually challenges you. Johnson's face flushed red. Challenge me. Is that what you think this is? Joy, I've been challenged by directors, critics, and audiences for 40 years. What you're doing isn't challenging. It's ambush journalism dressed up as daytime television. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. You think this is journalism? This is a talk show, Don. We talk. Sometimes people disagree. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to scripted interviews with Entertainment Tonight. The insult hit its mark. Johnson's hands were now visibly shaking with anger. You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I did come here expecting a certain level of professionalism. I expected to be treated with the same respect I've shown every host, every interviewer, every fan I've ever encountered. And you have been treated with respect, Joy insisted. I asked you legitimate questions about your public statements. Legitimate questions? Johnson's voice was rising to a dangerous level. You started this interview with a gotcha moment based on quotes you won't even show me the full context of. You've been combative and dismissive from the moment I sat down. If this is your idea of respect, I'd hate to see how you treat people you actually dislike. Whoopi tried again to restore order. Okay, everybody, let's just calm down for a minute. But Johnson was past the point of calm. No, Whoopi. I think Joy has something she wants to get off her chest. So, let's hear it. What's this really about, Joy? What did I do to earn this level of hostility? Joy's mask finally slipped completely. You want to know what this is about? It's about entitlement. It's about aging actors who think they can say whatever they want about the next generation and then hide behind their legacy when someone calls them on it. There it is, Johnson said quietly, nodding slowly. This isn't about anything I said in some interview. This is about you deciding I represent something you don't like and using this platform to take me down a peg. Nobody's trying to take you down, Dawn, Joy said. But her tone suggested otherwise. I'm trying to hold you accountable for your words. My words, which you still haven't shown me in their full context, Johnson pointed out. For all I know, you've taken a single sentence from a 20-minute conversation and built this entire confrontation around it. Joy finally held up the printed article. Fine, here's the full quote. In an interview with Variety, you said, and I quote, "The actors coming up today have incredible talent, but I sometimes wonder if they have the same hunger and resilience that my generation developed. Through years of rejection and struggle, the industry coddles performers now in ways that might not ultimately serve their growth as artists." Johnson blinked, clearly surprised. That's it. That's what this whole attack has been based on. You're criticizing an entire generation, Joy insisted. I'm making an observation about systemic changes in the industry, Johnson corrected. And if you read that quote honestly, it's hardly the scathing indictment you've been pretending it is. It's condescending and dismissive, Joy shot back. Johnson stood up slowly, his decision clearly made. You know what's condescending and dismissive, Joy? Inviting someone onto your show under false pretenses, ambushing them with a manufactured controversy, and then doubling down when they try to have an honest conversation with you. The studio was dead silent. Every camera was focused on Johnson as he looked down at Joy with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. I came here to promote a film I'm proud of, to have a conversation with people I respected. But what I've discovered is that at least one person at this table is more interested in creating drama than having genuine dialogue. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Johnson held up his hand. No, I'm talking now. For 40 years, I've done hundreds of these interviews. I've been asked tough questions, challenging questions, even hostile questions. But what I've never experienced is someone so determined to mischaracterize my words and my intentions that they're willing to ignore basic courtesy and professionalism to score points. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Johnson looked around the table at the other co-hosts who were staring at him with expressions ranging from sympathy to shock. You know what the saddest part about this is? Johnson continued, his voice now carrying the weight of genuine disappointment. I actually used to respect this show. I used to think it represented intelligent women having substantive conversations about important issues. But what I'm seeing today is just another example of media turning conversation into combat for entertainment value. Joy's face had gone pale, but her stubborn streak wouldn't let her back down. Dawn, you're being overly dramatic. This is exactly the kind of discussion this show was designed for. Discussion? Johnson's eyebrows shot up. Joy, you haven't been interested in discussion from the moment I sat down. You've been interested in confrontation. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see it tells me everything I need to know about your intentions. Sunny finally found her voice. Dawn, maybe we can start over. Talk about the movie you're here to promote. Johnson turned to her with a sad smile. Sunny, I appreciate that. I really do. But I think we're past that point now. Joy has made it clear that she's more interested in prosecuting me for a crime I didn't commit than having a genuine conversation. What crime? Joy demanded, her voice shrill now. Having an opinion? Making observations about your industry? No, Joy, Johnson said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone again. The crime of being honest about the challenges facing young actors today. Because apparently, expressing any concern about how the industry has changed makes me the enemy of progress. Joy stood up now too, matching his posture. You want to talk about honesty? Let's be honest. You're upset because someone finally called you out on your old school, out-of-touch attitudes. Out of touch, Johnson repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. Joy, I've worked with actors from every generation over the past 4 decades. I've mentored young performers. I've learned from them. I've watched them grow. But apparently, because I dared to suggest that struggle and rejection might actually strengthen an artist, I'm some kind of dinosaur who needs to be put in his place. If the shoe fits, Joy muttered just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. The comment hit Johnson like a physical blow. His entire demeanor changed, the last pretense of civility evaporating. There it is. Finally, some honesty from Joy Behar. This was never about my quote or my opinions about the industry. This was about you deciding that I represent something you want to tear down. Dawn, please, Whoopi interjected desperately. Let's all just take a step back. But Johnson was beyond stepping back. No, Whoopi. I think your audience deserves to see what really happens when someone comes on this show and doesn't play along with Joy's agenda. They deserve to see how a simple promotional interview gets turned into a public execution because one host decides to make it personal. Joy's face was now flushed with anger. Public execution? Are you serious right now? I asked you to explain your own words. You asked me to defend myself against charges you manufactured, Johnson corrected. And when I tried to provide context, you accused me of being defensive. When I tried to clarify my position, you accused me of making excuses. There was no winning with you, Joy. Because winning was never the point. Destroying me was the point. The audience was completely silent. The tension so thick it seemed to press down on everyone in the studio. Camera operators were zooming in on faces, capturing every micro-expression in this unprecedented meltdown. Nobody's trying to destroy you, Joyce said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, really, Johnson asked, pulling his phone from his pocket. Because I can already see the headlines being written. Don Johnson loses his cool on The View. Don Johnson can't handle tough questions. Don Johnson shows his true colors. That's what this was designed to produce, wasn't it? Joy opened her mouth, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her career, she seemed genuinely speechless. Johnson looked around the table one more time, his gaze lingering on each co-host. Ladies, I want to apologize to those of you who came here today expecting to have a real conversation. I'm sorry that Joy's need to create a viral moment has robbed us of that opportunity. Don, please don't go, Sarah N. said softly. We can still salvage this. Johnson shook his head sadly. Sarah, some things can't be salvaged. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Joy decided to make this personal, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that's acceptable behavior. He began unhooking his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. You know, I've been in this business long enough to know that sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is walk away. And I've definitely reached that point. Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out as a desperate attempt to regain control. So you're just going to run away? Isn't that proving my point about your generation not being able to handle criticism? Johnson stopped dead in his tracks, the microphone halfway out of his jacket. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before he turned back to face Joy with a look of such complete disdain that several audience members actually gasped. Joy, let me leave you with one final thought, he said, his voice carrying absolute finality. The difference between criticism and cruelty is intent. Criticism is meant to help someone grow or improve. What you've done here today was never about helping anyone. It was about feeding your own ego at my expense. He finished removing his microphone and set it carefully on the table. And for the record, I'm not running away from anything. I'm walking away from someone who has shown me a level of disrespect that I wouldn't tolerate from anyone, regardless of what show they happen to host. Joy stood there frozen as Johnson straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. To anyone watching this who might be wondering what really happened here today, I encourage you to look up the full context of any quotes you hear discussed on television. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you what to think. Make up your own minds based on complete information, not carefully edited sound bites designed to create controversy. He turned back to the other co-hosts, his expression softening slightly. Ladies, thank you for your time. I hope your show finds its way back to the thoughtful discourse it was once known for. And with that, Don Johnson turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a stunned studio in one of the most dramatic moments in daytime television history. The studio doors closed behind Don Johnson with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire building. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The cameras continued rolling, capturing what would become one of the most replayed moments in television history. Joy Behar stood frozen at the table, her mouth slightly open, staring at the doors through which Johnson had just exited. The confident, combative host who had dominated the conversation just moments before seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who looked genuinely shaken by what had just transpired. Whoopi Goldberg was the first to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, that just happened. The audience began to murmur, a low buzz of shocked conversation rippling through the studio. Sarah N. looked around the table helplessly, clearly unsure how to proceed. Sunny host was staring down at her notes, shaking her head slowly. We need to go to commercial. Someone called from off camera, but Whoopi held up her hand. No, not yet, she said, her voice gaining strength. I think we need to address what just happened here. Joy finally found her voice, but it came out defensive and shaky. He completely overreacted. I was just doing my job, asking the tough questions that our audience expects. Joy, Whoopi said carefully, I think we all need to take a moment to really think about what just went down. But Joy wasn't ready for self-reflection. What went down is that Don Johnson couldn't handle being challenged on his own words. He proved exactly the point I was trying to make about his generation, not being able to deal with criticism. Sarah N. looked up from the table, her expression troubled. Joy, I have to say, watching that from here, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like you were trying to create a moment rather than have a conversation. The comment hit Joy like cold water. Sarah, you're wrong. I was doing exactly what this show has always done, holding public figures accountable for their statements. By mischaracterizing those statements, Sunny host spoke up for the first time since Johnson's exit, her voice quiet but firm. Joy, I read that same interview. His comments were thoughtful and nuanced. What you presented here was a caricature designed to provoke a reaction. Joy's face flushed again, but this time with embarrassment rather than anger. I presented his exact words. You presented his exact words stripped of all context, Whoopi corrected gently but firmly. And when he tried to provide that context, you kept escalating instead of listening. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The co-hosts of The View were essentially conducting a post-mortem of their own show while still on the air. Look, Joy said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. Maybe I came on a little strong, but that's what people expect from this show. We're supposed to ask the hard questions. There's a difference between hard questions and hostile interrogation, Sarah pointed out. And what we just saw crossed that line. Joy looked around the table, realizing for perhaps the first time that she was completely isolated in her position. So, you're all taking a side now? There are no sides here, Joy, Whoopi said with the patience of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. There's just what happened. And what happened was that a guest came on our show expecting a professional interview and instead got ambushed. He called me unprofessional, Joy protested. And maybe he had a point, Sunny said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had been dropped in slow motion. Joy stared at her colleague, clearly stunned. Sunny, you can't be serious. I am serious, Sunny replied, meeting her gaze directly. Joy, I've watched you conduct hundreds of interviews. You're capable of being tough and incisive without being cruel. What we just saw wasn't your best work. The cameras captured Joy's face as the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. The confident combatant who had started this interview was crumbling before the audience's eyes. I wasn't being cruel, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I was just trying to get him to be honest about his attitudes. By attacking him personally? Sarah asked. By suggesting he was entitled and out of touch? That wasn't journalism, Joy. That was a personal vendetta disguised as an interview. Joy opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to be really listening to what her colleagues were saying. The saddest part, Whoopi continued, is that Don Johnson actually had interesting things to say about the industry. His observations about how the business has changed could have led to a fascinating discussion about mentorship, artistic development, the pros and cons of how we support young actors today. Instead, we turned it into a fight. We, Joy asked, her voice small now. You, Whoopi corrected gently but firmly. You turned it into a fight, Joy. And now we all have to live with the consequences. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Joy looked out at the audience, then back at her colleagues, then down at the table where Don Johnson's microphone still lay. I think, she said slowly, I may have gotten carried away. You think? Sarah asked, not unkindly. Joy took a deep breath. And for the first time since Johnson had walked out, she looked genuinely reflective rather than defensive. Maybe I did approach that interview with some preconceived notions. Maybe I was looking for a fight instead of a conversation. Maybe, Sunny raised an eyebrow. Okay, definitely, Joy admitted, her shoulders sagging. I saw those quotes, and I made assumptions about who Don Johnson was and what he represented, and I came into this interview ready for battle instead of dialogue. Whoopi nodded slowly. And now we have to figure out how to move forward from this, because this isn't just about one interview, Joy. This is about the integrity of this show and what we represent to our audience. Joy looked around the table at her colleagues, then directly into the main camera. I think I owe Don Johnson an apology, and I owe our audience an apology too. What you just witnessed wasn't The View at its best. It was me at my worst, and I'm sorry for that. The studio remained silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. It was a rare moment of genuine accountability on live television. "We're going to take a break now," Whoopi announced to the camera. "When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about what it means to have respectful dialogue, even when we disagree." As the red recording lights went dark and the studio buzzed with the controlled chaos of a commercial break, Joy Behar sat alone with the realization that she had just participated in one of the most damaging moments in her career. Don Johnson's words echoed in the sudden quiet. The difference between criticism and cruelty is intent. And in that moment of uncomfortable silence, it became clear that intent had been the missing ingredient all along. What do you think was the real turning point that made Don Johnson decide he'd had enough? Was it Joy's initial aggressive questioning, or was there a specific moment that pushed him over the edge? Subscribe and let me know in the comments below.